Kings once ruled their kingdom from a castle. Today the king is a man called Smith, and his castle is a town called Newcastle. There are 3 million people in Dan Smith's Kingdom of the North. 3 million people concerned about their jobs, their homes, their leisure. The Kingdom of the Three Rivers, Tyne, Wear and Tees, has known hard times. But after a generation of stalemate, the Northeast is news. And no one bangs a louder drum for progress than Dan Smith, the man who has led the struggle for recovery and who remembers vividly the agony as it all began.
In order to get the dole money when you were under 18, you had to come to a dole school at Jarrow. We used to come down to the ferry here, across the ferry to Jarrow. And they used to give us the most ridiculous things to do. We used to carve plant sticks and so on. And I then began to develop an interest in drawing, and I thought, well, to hell, I'm not wasting my time carving bits of wood and so on. And I used to do a certain amount of drawing, and I began to get interested in buildings because I'd worked on buildings for a little while. But the position was that you went from job to job, and I remember we had to look for work all the time. One of the things you had to do was to look for work every morning, and you had to go to the labour exchange and say where you'd been. And we used to come down to the shipyards here, I remember on the bank at Swan Hunters and the Naval Yard, and you used to stand there looking like slaves in the ancient market, you know, and the foreman would come out and look at you, and not this morning, and off you went, and you knew you were all right that day, that at least you had somewhere to stay. But again, this was the kind of background that made you rebellious. And I joined the ILP, and I joined the Peace Pledge Union, and I joined everything that was against anything, really. All of these factors were tremendously important in moulding one's rebellious streaks, and we became, if you like, theoreticians. We went from Karl Marx to chess. And I don't know whether we ever qualified as mathematicians, but we were pretty good chess players, pretty good draft players. We understood Das Kapital from chapter 1 to the end. We talked about dialectical materialism and all of these quite complicated philosophic discussions that we had. And in a sense, I think that this was self-educating. Against the rebellion, if you like, against poverty and unemployment and the unfairness of it all and the tough life of the Northeast, it laid what later on was to become a very burning desire to put it right.
Dan Smith was born 48 years ago, in sight of the Tyneside shipyards, in a miner's home in Wallsend. For his first job, he got 4 and 10 for a 44-hour week. Now he's a successful businessman with a 5-figure salary, has led Newcastle Council for 5 years, and drives a Mark 10 Jag in his new role as chairman of the Northern Region Economic Planning Council. Dan Smith is determined to redress the balance between an affluent South and an impoverished North. It has not been a lone struggle. The Northeast has become the region that echoes the fears and aspirations of all those parts of the nation that don't share the fat pay packets of the Midlands and the Southeast. Dan has urged reform and resurrection. He has backed the reorganisation of local government, backed housing, backed new towns, and a £90 million scheme to make Newcastle a Milan of the North. He has argued for more education, pleaded for money for the arts and sport, and fought to bring back to the North the industrial wealth it has earned. But how will ideas become reality? How will the region work? How will it play? How will its future measure up to its past? The history of Northumbria was written giant size, in great buildings that were once bastions of Christianity, seats of learning and of power, and in magnificent rugged castles which protected the forces of law against rebellion. For the Romans, the roads, rivers and bridges were the lifelines. The age of steam brought the railways, and our own day the motorways and the airports, the new arteries to bring life to the region. But the bridges across the three great rivers, Tyne, Wear and Tees, still bind together a community that stretches from the Scottish border south to the North Riding of Yorkshire. Thousands of square miles of England, seeking a 20th century pattern of its own. Newcastle is specially important because it is the only major city between Edinburgh and Leeds and the main shopping and commercial centre in the region. But Dan Smith doesn't see Newcastle as just another provincial town. To him, it's the capital of the North, and his £90 million plan to transform the city has aroused violent controversy. Tyneside's past heroes look down, waiting for the new city to take shape, but it will be a hollow victory unless the rest of the region can keep pace. 6 years ago, Dan Smith saw that hope for the future lay in a comprehensive policy for the North. It was Dan who gave Newcastle a 5-year housing plan, a planning officer, an inner cabinet, and a town manager. It was Dan who inspired a regional development council, associations for art and sport, and who helped to sow the seeds of Britain's new regional planning councils. Each of these swelled the voice of the North East until it became the most publicised region in the country. Penny plain and tuppence coloured, the white papers and colour sections have drowned the North East in a sea of words. But for the Geordie, living in an environment that hasn't changed for 100 years, words are not enough. The traditional industries, shipbuilding, coal and steel, have their backs to the wall, and the wall is crumbling. The North East was first with the big things, with coal, iron, steam, ships, turbines. It was inventive, tough and resilient. Our industrial empire was won not on the playing fields of Eton, but under the coal fields of Northumberland and Durham. As her major industries declined and unemployment remained persistently at double the national average, the region suffered a continual drain of youth and intelligence to the south. Industrial traditions are strong. The unions have bitter memories of an all-too-recent past. Dan shares those memories. They are his spur to seeing that things will be changed in the future.
My father was a miner. He worked in a colliery at Wallsend up the river here. And particularly people who knew the times would know that this was a difficult time for the miners. And the 1926 strike was a defeat. And then from 1926 until 1929, my father worked about 18 months, so that if you take from 1918 to 1929, there was about 2 years and a half work. So that this was humiliating, you know, really humiliating, and you felt a sense of injustice, and at that time I felt, well, you know, this has got to be altered, and right from those very early years, I should think, certainly by the time I was 12, I was a red-hot rebel and determined to alter it. You've then got to say to the people of today, well, in addition to getting rid of all the squalor of yesterday, which you have no responsibility for, you've got to plan for tomorrow, so that you're really planning for the future with the people of today who don't even as yet in the main recognize what's necessary for today. There's a tendency to accept, if it wasn't the case, how could it be that hundreds of thousands of people live in slums without protesting? You know, if these people would but protest and demand more, then surely it would be acted upon more quickly. So I see that the people who have had the benefit not only of education but of travel, who've lived in good places, that these people are the ones who've got to carry the torch for tomorrow, together with the people like ourselves, politicians, who see the needs but who depend on the votes, because it's possible by planning for tomorrow that the people who you're planning for, they're not here. They can't vote for you, they can't turn up at a meeting tomorrow night, half of them are not born yet.
Dan talks about planning for tomorrow, but has the future been allowed to look after itself for too long? Too often, the most telling images of the North are the symbols of a defiant past, conjuring up images of ghosts of armies countermarching across the fields, of border raiders at the gates, and of Viking ships approaching the shore. In the heart of the coalfields there are great country houses, like Seaton Delaval, John Vanbragh's masterpiece, built for a wealthy landowner who could afford the trappings of style and power. But now its magnificent burned-out hall echoes the rooks and the sound of distant machinery chattering in the mines. At Tyne mouth, glimpsed through some forgotten grave, is the statue of Admiral Lord Collingwood of Newcastle, who in command of the Royal Sovereign led the British fleet into action at Trafalgar. In their day, great liners launched on the Tyne, like the Mauretania, sailed proudly past his massive and pompous array of columns, steps, and cannon. But the guns that blasted the British to victory at Trafalgar now point across the river to the streets of South Shields and Jarrow, and can do little to defend their tired acres of neglect and decay from the chill winds of economic change and industrial decline. On the Jarrow coast is the site of a Saxon church and a monastery 1,200 years old, that in any other country would be a national shrine, where the Venerable Bede, father of English literature and learning, recorded the total sum of knowledge of his time. But the ruins lie forgotten near a heap of pit props. Across the river, the magnificent ruins of Tynemouth Priory command the headland and the sea. For over 1,300 years monastic buildings have stood here, destroyed time after time by the Danes, abandoned, rebuilt, fortified, now standing incongruously at the end of the road through the docks of North Shields and Wallsend. But for the millions of people packed into the industrial and mining towns along the coast, some of the most extensive stretches of underpopulated land in Britain lie only a few miles away. From the Scottish border to the Cleveland Hills in Yorkshire is virtually one vast national park, a short drive from North Shields, Jarrow, Byker, Stanley and Consett are wild open spaces that are untouched, unspoiled and unused. The cities and towns of the northeast may have paradise on their doorstep, but in their own streets the signs of progress towards better living conditions are submerged by the accumulation of generations of uncertainty and neglect. As the crumbling walls are bulldozed to the ground, there must be many people asking whether this is their dream of a golden future. It's hard to measure up to the beauty and quality of the past in a welfare state that only spends 3% of its national income on housing its people. And when you do bring in the artist and the architect to demonstrate your faith in the future, people may not be very impressed by mere size and glossy finishes, particularly if it's in the place where they come to pay their rates. People will be impressed when they see something happening. In Welbar House, catalogue spec builders modern, the regional plan is getting into action. The ministry men have moved in to create a little Whitehall of the north, to get the region moving again, and to reverse the fortunes of a recent past.
But a matter of 5 or 6 years ago, the northeast was in fact gradually in decline. It was, it was suffering from anemia. It didn't know what was wrong with it, and it just felt off colour. It didn't know where to turn. This was largely because the regional capital, which must be the heart of the region. In any region, it must have a virile, active, lively capital. In fact, the heart of this region was just beating, just turning over. And I see, therefore, the northern region not only being international in its production of industrial things such as the ships, because we've always had the river, and the river here flows out into the sea and it goes into the world. It knows no boundaries. And the ships that these men produce are the same. It's international in this sense. We've got a regional advisory planning committee of local government. We have some of the best planning officers in Britain that we've attracted to the region, in some of the major counties and certainly in the city here. So that with this kind of local government official, the council has got to take, if you like, from Whitehall to regional level, and then from regional level hand on to the planning authorities of local government, regional ideas and regional thinking. Our basic job, as I see it, is to reverse the trend of migration away from the region. And we've got to be able to do this on a fairly massive scale, because by the end of this century, there are going to be 17 million more people in Britain. And if you think of this in total, it's for every 3 people there are now, there's going to be another one. I think that the northeast and the northern region has got to take in 1.5 million to 2 million of these people, so that we're not simply looking for jobs for the people that are here, although this has got to be done. We're looking for an industrial background to the housing and the creation of an environment for 1.5 million to 2 million of people within this northern region. This is the extent of the challenge.
The regional plan will bring a sense of purpose and design. The anatomy of the North is its mind, its muscle, and its heart. The muscle is supplied by the new industrial power of plastics and chemicals on Teesside. The region is pinning its faith on the new cathedrals of technology, which can absorb the energies and loyalties of men used to the comradeship of heavy work, and can give the region this new and powerful identity. If the region is flexing its muscles on Teesside, its mind is represented by Durham on the Weir. Miraculously preserved from the squalor of the surrounding pits, this once sleepy cathedral town, with its magnificent situation above the river and its beautiful old buildings, has become a growth point for expanding education. The great architecture of Durham Cathedral and the culture of faith and learning it expressed were a light in Europe during the Dark Ages. Now Durham has become a city of institutions, of faith, learning and administration, with a rapidly expanding university, a technical college, and the seat of local government for the county. Like many other cathedral towns and cities in Britain, Durham has a special legacy from the past, an environment consistent, whole, and beautiful that must be preserved against the intrusions of the 20th century. But new buildings sprout up around the city, like the vast new county hall, where today's feudal lords, elected by the people, collect their tithes and taxes and rule over a vast administrative machine from their graph paper palace, which is anonymous and dull. It has none of the imagination of the brash new university buildings near the cathedral, or the Acropolis of learning on surrounding hills, which form a tenuous link between the old and the new. Amongst a few good buildings, too much of the new architecture leaves a great deal to be desired. But the spirit of the region must come from the heart. Newcastle is that heart. Dan Smith firmly believes that it must become a modern metropolis, a capital city of the North to coordinate the mind and muscle of the region. Newcastle was all of this 100 years ago, but if the heart is to beat strongly again, the 20th century will have to be drawn into the glorious but decaying fabric of the past. Replanning a historic and beautiful city, where there is so much worth keeping, but also so much that must be renewed, is bound to spark off violent argument. It's not surprising to find that planning and redevelopment come second only to sport in the local papers. The people of Newcastle are suspicious of change, afraid that their new city, when it comes, may prove to be inflexible and unimaginative, or that the whole project is too ambitious and is going to cost too much. But for Dan Smith, the new regional capital is only a beginning.
We've now got to talk in terms of new cities. This is the point that I want to underline, because 40, 50, 60, 70,000 people are playing with 17 million population. In the northeast again, you had the background, if you like, in Peterlee of the hostility of people who lived in the villages. They felt that this was the kind of community that they wanted, and they thought they could hang on to this. They thought that the collieries were eternal, and they were led to believe this. They lived in a world when mining had to be a career, and they had recruiting officers for miners. The stark reality was that the boys that made mining the career, weren't really to finish their career, that they were going, in fact, to have to move away from the area. This was the tragedy. You can only develop new towns, and you can only give them really vital life if they are developed consciously and positively for bringing in new populations into the region, not as overspill, not as reluctant people moving out of a mining village and mining communities, but going towards something in a pioneering sense, taking part in building it up. We're in at the beginning. If we're going to build up the economy of this region, we're going to have our coloured friends coming to the northern region. We don't have to treat them like they are in Smethwick. We know they're coming. If we can make this an international region, and I'm sure we can, then in turn I think that economically we can work with them. We can really bring to life the broad political feeling that I had in my early days, that a man's a man for all that, and no matter what the colour of his skin or whether he's white or isn't white is irrelevant, that we can start to build towards, if you like, the broader regional vision. And if you say, well, where would it end? It would mean that in the African cities of tomorrow, where they haven't even got the car yet, their cities will cope with the car, and I would like to think that some of our new city regions, signposting the way to the year 2000, will be reflected in these new and rising cities. So that if this becomes reality, it can become reality, then we will have produced a cultural leisure background in an age of leisure. And just as in the Industrial Revolution we were in advance of our time, it was here that we produced the steam trains and the Mauritanias and coal and steel from iron ore. In the age of leisure, we ourselves will be leading, because I really feel that this will be the contribution that we'll make. It demands courage in newspaper owners and in television, because this is a great battle that we're fighting. And great battles cannot be fought, and certainly cannot be won without sacrifice. If we succeed, it's going to cost a lot of money, of course. And people say on the one hand, well, you're spending a lot of money and you're not doing anything. But the basic costs of redevelopment are in the early stages. And the more effectively you pre-plan it, the more rapid the rate of completion, so that you will see its completion in a comparatively short space of time. Can it be paid for? It can be paid for. Can it be paid for by the ratepayer without government help? It can't. Can the government give help? Only if people are prepared to consider that it's worthwhile. The government is the people. The government can do nothing without the effort of people. And we cannot build a great region or a great Britain and make it greater than it has been in the past unless we can get across to the people that we need their enthusiasm and their endeavour and their work, so that the builder that builds and the bricklayer that lays bricks and the joiner that joins and the plumber that plumbs, they do it just that bit better, that bit quicker. And they feel that in doing these things that they're creating something which is worth creating for their own family. Will they do this? Of course they will.
The trouble is that whereas most of us would willingly sacrifice for our own children, when you collect parents together and label them ratepayers, they can bitterly oppose the idea of sacrifice for the future. But who is the future for? The parents and grandparents who cling to a dying image of the past? The men who thought the mines were eternal and think that their way of life too will last forever? If you really wanted to recreate the Northeast, what might their children look forward to? To find out, we commissioned a group of young architects to design a new region, to go out on a limb and speculate on what the Northeast could become by the end of the century. Planning for pleasure, because the future must provide for happiness and the enjoyment of life, not just places to live and places to work. What sort of world would they design for us to live in? They began with an X-ray of the region, selecting 5 places that could each contribute something different to the pattern of a leisure society tomorrow. In the future, leisure is going to be as important as work. By the year 2000, the pleasure resorts of the North will have to be transformed. So the first place they looked at was Whitley Bay, as it is now. A golden mile of sport and recreation could replace the tired old remnants of holidays past. Then they looked at Almouth, a small and select Victorian resort on a river estuary by the sea. In contrast to Whitley Bay, this could become a holiday resort for the minority, a quiet place to stay, where festivals of art and music could bring a touch of Aldborough to the northeast coast. They also had ideas for the scattered forestry villages and the magnificent empty hills. But the biggest change of all could be at Durham, in the center of the region, with Tyneside and Teesside each only 30 miles away. By the year 2000, Durham could so easily be spoiled by indiscriminate rebuilding. One answer would be to pull out a twin city and build there all the cultural and sports facilities that other cities can't support on their own. An opera house, theatre, sports stadium, conference halls and exhibitions for the whole region. By building astride the A1 in the open fields, the old Durham would not be spoiled, and the new twin city would only be minutes away by monorail. Here, then, is a vision of the Northeast as it could be in the space age to come. Almouth could have a harbour and yachting marina, built in the river estuary with parks, gardens, golf links and quiet hotels on its beautiful site by the sea. This could be the Aldborough of the North, a specialized center for festivals of art and music, a sophisticated, modern resort, making the most of a traditional setting. Traffic in the future will demand motorways, not only between the major cities, but down to the sea and up into the hills, to defeat the frustrating crawl that makes weekend and holiday traffic so grim. With these roads, the Lake District, the hills, dales and forests, and the empty acres of Northumberland need no longer be remote, nor need they be spoiled. They will offer a real alternative to city life and the urban environment. Instead of isolated forestry villages, self-contained communities could be built with small factories for producing timber products. People who wanted peace and quiet could retire to a modern hotel or a sanatorium designed to make the most of the sun and the views over the forest. The village itself would have its own small centre of shops and pubs, with weekend houses for the city man and his family who want to get away from the noise and bustle of urban life and to enjoy the remote countryside. We seem very reluctant to explore new forms of housing and living that other countries in Scandinavia and Europe have already got off the ground. Why should all the best things be abroad? With decent facilities, there could be marvellous skiing in the Cheviots during the winter months, or rambling clubs and hostels in the summer. Why should we always end up with an old tractor and a tow rope instead of a decent ski lift? Spectacular sports viewed from a modern bar or restaurant in the hills above is perfectly feasible. All these buildings exist elsewhere in the world. Why shouldn't we do just as well, or even better? Why not have an Olympic standard ice rink and swimming pool that could remain open all the year round? Pleasure without pain, a good life, sport and recreation for every man, culminating in the golden mile of a transformed Whitley Bay. Those glittering dreams of tomorrow may never be. They only make more poignant the poverty of the present. A poverty based not so much on neglect as on the absence of any positive will to make it better. It is as though some deep Puritan instinct in the national conscience was guarding us from actually committing the sin of enjoyment. What is the reward that the working man and his family can expect after a hard day's work? A load of British rubbish. Do you wish you were here? No wonder the travel agents do a roaring trade, and the package tours choke the air lanes across the channel. Like the fat lady in the postcard, the boarding house joke just isn't funny anymore. It's a pity you can't redesign the British weather, but most of us like to get away once in a while, and the majority still spend their holidays on our own shores. What do they find when they get there? Have fun. Welcome to the Golden Mile. Welcome to Sunset Strip. Welcome to the Las Vegas of the North. The contrasts are not only apparent in the architecture of pleasure. Putting a whole region right is not just a matter of solving some town's overspill problem. Housing is not quite the same as living. Even when the bulldozers move in to make something new, it is too often only to replace condemned dwellings with something a little more hygienic. The Northeast has acres of new housing. The bylaw streets and dual carriageways lead from one indistinguishable housing estate to another. But it's the mistakes made in the South all over again. The Northeast seems hell-bent on replacing the back-to-backs and Colliery Row with a poor copy of the monotonous deserts of southeast suburbia of 30 years ago. Fierce local pride, local government and parish pump politics create little islands of development that seem innocent enough on the surface. but together they are eating away the land like a virulent cancer, turning real and recognizable places into just another suburb of nowhere. There's so much to do. Building by new methods could become a huge new industry for the north, with endless possibilities for expansion. The start has been made in this factory that was only a timber yard 2 years ago, and is now an assembly line turning out houses designed in 4 compact units for direct delivery to the site. As the whole production line is under cover, working conditions are better, and there's no need to knock off for frost or rain. The 4 units of a 3-bedroomed house, complete with central heating, kitchen and bathroom, can be delivered by trailer anywhere in the country. Delivered on Monday, you can move in and switch on the TV on Friday. 6 men can put up 4 houses in only 5 days. But we should be talking of thousands of men and tens of thousands of houses. If we're going to get really good new housing quickly enough, it's going to take a lot more than a converted timber works with an improvised assembly line to tool up a building industry still in the horse and carriage days. New houses multiplied become new towns. The Northeast has its share of new towns, but you can spend a lot of time in them without finding any new ideas. Most are too small to support a lively centre, too spread out to feel like towns at all, and too prepared to rely on outworn planning and architecture that doesn't begin to make a memorable place. Teletown, with its featureless acres of housing, its drab centre, is out of date before it's on the ground. With all the promise of its superb landscape, the Northeast could have leapfrogged 30 years ahead of the South. Instead, it has produced pale imitations of 30 years ago. Revamping the old with a slick veneer of modernity is no answer. Behind the picture window and the contemporary porch is basically the same house plan put up in countless pre-war suburbs. The familiar old semi-D, served with a new sauce, and based not on coal or steel, but on hair cream and razor blades. Whatever can be said against the squalor and decay of obsolete towns and villages, at least they were unique, unmistakable places. Town and country were distinct. Loyalty, community, identity, even dialect really meant something to people. At Peterlee, the planners and architects realized this and really tried to foster the friendliness and community of Colliery Row in modern terms. But the whole town was built on coal, doomed from the start to be spread out and thin on the ground. It's taken 15 years to overcome the resistance of the miners. But as the pits are closed and new factories move in, the ghost of a town centre is beginning to take shape. The first real planning success is at Billingham, where at least the centre has really got moving. First with convenient 2-deck parking, a traffic-free pedestrian plaza, shopping on 2 levels, and a spiral ramp winding easily up to the upper story. 2-level shops aren't always a great success, but here the planners had the wit to put the betting shops on the upper level, and their troubles were over. Along with toy shops, cafes, and a modest little art gallery, they've proved a successful magnet to attract the reluctant customers up off the ground. The future will see a second precinct, sports hall and theatre, in addition to the bowling alley, modern hotel, and blocks of flats that are already there. Safe from the cars, the kids can play in peace, while Mum does the shopping. Not exactly Disneyland, but it keeps them occupied and out of mischief. The council describes all this as the miracle of Billingham. Well, planning perhaps, but it's certainly no miracle of design. And the fairy godmother with a magic wand is the ICI, which has provided the LSD. The multi-million expansion of the chemical industry has brought employment to the area and a fat rates check to the local authority. Money is obviously the key to any urban project. But is hard cash enough on its own? When wealth and power are no longer in the hands of a few enlightened patrons, isn't it about time our industrial giants recognized that they should be the leaders of world design? At Killingworth, the Northeast may have its first new town that will combine intelligent planning with imaginative design, even though all you can see at the moment is one good modern building. But as the contractors churn up the mud and prepare to build, one has to ask whether a smattering of new towns can possibly cope with the needs of a region of 3 million people, and whether our antiquated system of local government is equipped to tackle the job of solving a region's problems.
We've got to rationalise, we've got to modernise local government so that we can use the top designers who are available in the region, using their design skill, their planning skill, combining the local councillors with ability to tackle these regional problems, rather than if you take on this river, there are 18 authorities. And if you take 15 people meeting on each of them, 18 times 15, I don't know how many that is, but it's a lot of people, discussing housing with their own engineer, with their own architect, some of them without architects. Producing the houses, what kind of houses? Different kinds, considering the same problems, different solutions in different authorities within their own boundaries. Now, I can't see how, without the architect and the engineer stating this dilemma, and he's got to state it, the city architects and the town architects and engineers and planners have got to come out and say this is damn nonsense. It just isn't on. It's economically wrong and it's design-wise wrong. The same with the contractors. The contractors really who have the skill and know-how on the site, these have got to be brought into the scheme of things and be given long-term production lines. But the challenge to the architect is to combine the industrialized techniques with the ability of the architect and the ability of the artist. And this is where I think that unless we can get the local authorities, A, modernizing, thinking big, developing the production line, and at the same time recognizing that it's no good having a College of Art and Industrial Design and a College of Fine Art if the artists, once they come out of it, and the sculptors, once they come out of it, have no part in the creation of the environment. It's hypocrisy if they're not used and if they're not employed by local authorities, because we need this kind of refinement with the industrialized techniques so that we get the best of industrialized techniques with the best of homes.
Everywhere, the refinement of the past is more telling than the products of today. Many of the old towns seem to express that innate sensitivity to man and to materials that makes places you really remember. The durability of stone, the quality of the buildings seem to be everlasting. The harmony of proportion and composition are near perfect. Even in the 19th century, the builder could make a new town for lead miners that lies on the ground as though it had been there forever. Only rarely is there comparable quality in the modern architecture. The new gasboard building at Killingworth, even though unfinished when these pictures were taken, certainly has quality and the crisp and clear outlines of a metal architecture that absolutely separates the buildings of today from the cosy romance of the past. It reflects the dramatic technical progress that has led from the horse and buggy to the jet airliner, and is surely an adequate symbol of efficiency for a society of administrators. An unpretentious new building for the electricity board harmonizes easily with a traditional background. It's ironic to discover that in the middle of the coal fields, two of the best new buildings are for gas and electricity. This little round library in Newcastle is set in a sea of Victorian terraces. Like having a diamond stuck in your ear, says Dan. But it's also a reminder that today, architecture is for everyone. An architecture of democracy, not only at the service of power and wealth. But how do the locals react to a new world? How does it square with their dream of heaven?
You could ask any member of the public going to a football match, what do you want to do? And he'd say, I would love to live in a thatched cottage. You see, he knows this. He doesn't know why, but he sees a cottage if he goes to the Cotswolds, and this is his dream of heaven. You don't know why, because in fact, you know, it might rain in and goodness knows what, but he imagines this is what he wants. And it's, if you like, combining his desire to move into a house like that and take a deep breath and say, this is what I've wanted all my life. It's a simple challenge. It's a simple challenge, in fact, and the ordinary man knows what he wants. So that the past, if you like, teaches us this. It teaches the ordinary man that if he goes somewhere, if he goes to the Lake District, he sees the lakes and he sees a mountain and he says, this is right. And he sees a block of flats and he says, that sticks up like a sore thumb. He knows the difference. He knows the difference between a mountain and a block of flats. And it's this kind of challenge, the landscape, the building in the landscape. He doesn't talk about buildings in the Lake District, he talks about the landscape. It's because in these places, in the old market towns, they knew how to build. They knew that the buildings were part of the town. They weren't all of the town. It was the feel of it that mattered. And in the city, if you go down Grey Street, you knew that these people had a conception, not only of material, proportion, scale, grandeur, if you like. All of these things were combined, and the ordinary man can feel this.
Maybe we do. But what do we do about it ourselves? What does it matter to us? No one will thank you for harping on this image of the North, but it's there, and no answer just to turn a blind eye. Insecurity from the past still pervades many parts of the Northeast. The ghosts of the Jarrow marchers have still to be exorcised from the places where the threat to your job and the prospect of the dole are real fears. Nothing is permanent. The future's not to be trusted. Spend your money while it's there. So people still live in places like this, when the working men's clubs have more money than they know how to spend. Penny-wise and pound-foolish, we seem to distrust putting our money into anything worthwhile and permanent. Yet in spite of this background, Dan Smith remains optimistic, confident in the ability of the region to get moving again, although he often seems to be a one-Dan band. But when the region prospered on ships, coal and steel, it showed what could be done with power and decision in the hands of a few enlightened men. The bridges of Newcastle are powerful symbols of what they achieved. But what do they mean to the Northeast now? What new symbols will demonstrate its faith in the future?
Well, the bridges, to me, here, symbolize the Northeast. I think whenever you see a picture of these bridges, you get the feeling of the strength of the region, the engineering past of the region, and particularly this bridge where the trains go across. This railway was slammed right into the heart of Newcastle. It went in between the castle and the keep almost. They had no regard, they wanted communication, and they forced this through. Not necessarily democratically. Now, I see the century that we're moving towards now as being the age of leisure, the century of leisure. The leaders that we've got to create and develop have got to be able to develop in the sciences, the technologies. They've got to be able to develop the art, the sport into the age of leisure, and this is the job I see us doing. I don't think we'll have new bridges to show for it. I think we'll have intellectual achievements, happy environment, happy people, working in good environment, living in good environment, and really realizing what life was all about.
In Durham, centuries ago, the lords of the Palatinate looked out of their castle across the kingdom they ruled. Can a new regional government reshape the destiny of the North? It'll be a tragedy if Dan's castle is only in the air.
Now get your meat and clays, burn out your hoods and fire and pray. All your meat's brought to the door, oh happy ye should be. A soap and tool and wooden spoon and a little penny pot. They'll fetch your papers every week for ye to clean your pot. Oh, there's nae good luck in Durham jail, there's nae good luck at all. What's for reading Scully for but just to make you smile?